All right, so welcome. This evening we're going to visit some about Buddhism. And last week we talked about Hinduism, and so I'm going to go ahead and do the screen share thing here.
Oh no. Who'd cut me off?
Uh-oh. Something happened?
Can't you see?
I can't see.
Okay, do you see a slide that says God in other cultures, Buddhism?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
No, I'm cut off.
Uh-oh.
You have to put me back on.
Can she push a button?
Esther Devon, do you have a suggestion?
Yes, under participants, Patty, if you will find Carol's name and then you can request that she turn on her camera.
She doesn't have, oh wait, okay, got it. Okay, I did that.
Perfect. And then Carol, you'll just have to find where it has the video and make sure there's not a red line through it.
Yeah, I know, but it's not coming up.
Are you on an iPad?
No, I'm on my phone.
Okay, so tap the screen once and then you should have some options.
Nope. Okay, I'm gonna go back and just log in again.
Okay.
Okay.
Hey, Devin, usually it's Marie and I that cut Carol off. I can't believe Patty did that.
Gosh darn it, I'm still on. I can't find my leave meeting. Oh, just a minute.
Oh, there you are. We see.
There you are.
Okay, but I can't see. Okay, I gotcha.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Okay, wonderful.
We're back in business.
Right.
Tell that Carol to quit causing problems.
That's because you didn't feed me, Marie.
Right, right.
All right.
Okay, I'll get you.
All right. All right. So this evening we're talking about Buddhism. Last week we talked about Hinduism and where it came from, and I wanted to put this slide up and add a little bit to it to show you that Buddhism comes out of Hinduism. We talked about Hinduism last week.
I didn't know that.
You see my cursor there, that it came out of the indigenous religions of that place in India, the lower valley below the mountains there in India, and there's a very extreme form of Hinduism called Jainism. And so that plays in our story tonight, so I wanted to bring that up. And out of that came Buddhism, and you'll see how. But I also want to point out that after the Buddha died, there became two strains, if you will. We might, in our language, call them denominations of Buddhism. One's the Theravada, and the other one's the Mahayana. So that is kind of a picture of where we're going to go this evening. So to understand the beginnings of Buddhism, we have to get to know a gentleman by the name of Siddhartha Gautama. And he was born about 560 BC, about 560 years before Christ. He was born in northeast India, and his parents were noble. They were of the highest caste of that Indian society that we talked about last time. His given name was Siddhartha Gautama, and that Siddhartha Gautama is his family name. Siddhartha means wish fulfilling, and that's kind of important in the family story. He followed all of the things of Hinduism quite religiously, if you could use that word. And he married, and he had a son, and he had a wife, and everything was supposed to be wonderful, and he was supposed to succeed his father and be the ruler of this particular group of people in India. But he was extremely unhappy and unfulfilled and didn't like anything that was around him. And if you've seen the movie with Eddie Murphy about coming to America, it's that kind of thing where he had everything but bored to tears by the whole thing. There was a kind of a crisis in his life. And so he decided that he was going to renounce his life, and he left his family, his wife and his son, and left in the middle of the night, kind of stuck out as it were, and went looking for salvation. So his search took him to where he ended up becoming an ascetic. He became a Jainist, which meant he cut off all his hair, he put on these really rough garments, and he began his search. And when he was doing that, he tried yoga, he tried philosophy, he tried the different paths of devotion that were available to people of the Hindu religion, but nothing really satisfied him. He had a vision in the middle of all of that of an old man, a dead man, a sick man, and a monk, and he was like, what is that? Couldn't make any sense out of that. So he turned even more clearly, very devotedly to Jainism, but actually it almost killed him, which in reality is what it leads to, because you basically starve yourself to death. They learn to beg, and the really good ones, in their use of the language, the really good Jainists subsist on several grains of rice a day and a little tea. That's it. So you can imagine what that does to you physically, but it's so that you can separate your body from your soul and really get attached to what's important. So he, in his recovery though, he begged some food and got strong again, but his fellow Jainists were really upset with him because they figured he was on the verge of reaching moksha, and he walked away from it. So they just had no respect for him. So he was 35 at that time, and he thought, that's it, I'm going to go sit somewhere and figure this out. And sat under a bo tree or a bada tree to figure out what this whole thing was about. Why is this mortal misery, that's the language they use, on top of us? And here's a depiction of that. You can see him sitting in a lotus position. Here's another example of that in Thailand. One of the famous statues of Buddha seeking enlightenment. He had success. He passed in this meditative state through 4 states. One was detachment from the sensory things around him, from thinking in words and ideas to intuitive thought, from vitality, being alive, to this kind of blissful peace, and then beyond the opposites in life of pleasure and pain and all that goes with that. And he basically embraced a cosmic truth, or the ultimate order of things, which he referred to as Dharma. And JC mentioned that, brought that up last week, and it's related to the Hindu idea, but he took it a little bit different direction, and we'll see that in a bit. So that's the life of the Buddha. He felt like he had arrived, if you will. And he attained pure awareness, that is to say, awareness without any attachment to it, or any attachment to the body, or any joy in it. It just was. It didn't make him sad, it didn't make him happy. According to him, it just was pure awareness. And he then became aware of what would bring one to that sense of pure awareness without joy or sorrow or attachment. And that was to break what he called the 12 link chain of causation. And in order to break that chain, you had to break the first link so that the whole chain would be broken. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So it's this whole awareness that came to him through this event. He ended up having some disciples. He went to the Jainists, and some of them joined, and some didn't. As I said earlier, in his group, he demolished the whole caste system, and he ended up with some folks following him that gained this sort of perfected state where they understood what he was talking about. They had experienced it for himself, and they went out and spread that word amongst people and began to make disciples where they went. A lot of people came to him and said, you know, this is such a good deal. You've got to allow women to be a part of these groups, the Sanghas. And finally, he relented and said, okay, we'll do that, but we're going to have them have their own groups. They're not going to be mixed with the men, because that's too much of a distraction for one side or the other. And so his group was growing. They were spreading the word around that area of India. And his cousin, and I'm not going to try to pronounce his name, tried to succeed him, tried to set himself up to take his place when he was gone. Then he tried to out-teach him, and that didn't work. And then he tried to murder him, and that didn't work. And he got kind of pitched out on his head and was sent away. So this group coalesced around Siddhartha, and he kept leading this group, these many groups. People would come and travel and get teaching from him and then go back home. And he did this for 45 years. And then at the age of 80, he died. The best we can figure from his records, it was some kind of an illness. There's a big debate about what kind of illness it was. That was a long time ago. So we don't have a lot of details there, but he had left instructions that when he was gone, that he would just, people should go and do their own thing, and they should avoid hanging on to things of his or parts of him. But his followers decided that wasn't what they wanted to do, and they kind of divided up his belongings into 8 groups, and that became instrumental in establishing the schools of thought about the Buddha later. So you'll see that here too. There are the 2 different kinds of Buddhism. One is the Theravada Buddhism, as I said, and the other one is the Mahayana. And the main difference is what emphasis they place on the life of the Buddha. By that, I mean that the Theravada group tend to be pretty conservative and quote unquote orthodox. That's how they name it. They follow kind of a narrow path of the middle way, and they focus on the life of the Buddha as a monk, as a teacher, someone to follow, someone to emulate. But salvation is through your own efforts rather than getting any kind of help from heavenly beings or from the Buddha himself. He's just kind of like the first among equals, if you will. And so that group is one of the major groups. And if you go to Asia, you'll see a lot of that kind of Buddhism there. The other group, the Mahayana Buddhists, Mahayana is loosely translated as the large vehicle, and they teach there's a variety of ways to reach Nirvana, which is the Buddhist understanding of salvation. These, I used to be able to say that word, Bodhistas, I didn't say that right. They're people who've already been to this awakening, this Nirvana, this pure awareness, are there to help those who are on their way to Nirvana. and they believe that the Buddha is prime amongst them, but there are other ones. So even though the Buddha became more than a mere man, for this group, the fact was they really teach that he was the incarnation. If you are someone who goes to familiar with any kind of Christian church stuff, that word will ring a bell. Incarnation of the eternal Buddha. And so that is a big departure from some of the basics that the Buddha himself taught. They believe that everyone is potentially a Buddha. And so that's the goal in this life, is to become like the Buddha and then be translated into Nirvana at the end of that. So that encompasses the first 200-300 years, maybe 400 years of Buddhism, but then it moved into Asia, and Japan and Tibet, and that gave it a whole new kind of understanding, because it began to take some of the understandings of religion in Asia and fold those in and expand the thought. So here's again what we're talking about is this was where Buddhism started, was right in this area, and then they went through Thailand into China and to Japan. This is a pretty short journey by boat or following this land along the edge of the coast into Thailand. So they didn't do the mountain deal. They went through this way, and then when it went into Tibet up here, they went around the backside of the mountains and moved into that area. Okay, so here's what the Buddha came to understand, that there's this chain that binds people to the world, to misconceptions, and to understandings of life that are incorrect. And the first one of those, the first link in that chain that has to be broken is that, hello, person, you are basically ignorant about what life is about. And until you accept the fact that you don't know, you can't know. And so that's the chain, and I'll talk a little bit more about that link in just a minute. From that, then there's this understanding that ignorance leads you to have a disposition and a way of thinking, a way of being, and that leads to a particular kind of consciousness, and we each have our own kinds of ways of doing that. And in a conscious state, you give name and form to things. We call those ideas, descriptions, understandings, and then into that comes the six senses, the fields of all of that, and that leads to a contact with that experience. Those contacts with the world give us feelings. Those feelings give us cravings. Those cravings give us the desire to appropriate, get stuff, get things, get experiences, get involved in life, so that we might see ourselves as becoming. And then we put a lot of emphasis on the birth piece of life, and then of course the dying and the aging piece of life. So all those things are all connected together, the Buddha said, and if we don't understand that chain, then there's no way to escape that chain and what it binds us to. So you say, okay, so what does that mean? All right, so he took those ideas and said there are four truths basically that you need to adopt, understand, embrace if you're going to move in the right direction. And the first one is the most important. For the Buddha, for Buddhists, the statement is this: all life is suffering and misery, pain and anxiety. All of life is suffering and misery and pain and anxiety. If you leave the word all out of that statement, it's an untrue statement. The whole thing is suffering and misery.
Wow.
And that really kind of, we run into that as Western culture people and go, huh, really? Well, I don't know about that. And they would
It's like,
say,
oh, wow, sign me up. I
Yeah,
want to be a part of that.
exactly. And they would nod. The true Buddhist would nod at you and say, exactly. That's where the fumble for you starts, is that you aren't ready to accept that first basic truth. Until you can get there, the rest of this is not going to make sense. Yeah. So that's very fundamental to Buddhist teaching. And I don't know about you all, but the first time I read that and had people confirm that for me, it was like, wow. It's like what you said, Marie. Yeah, sign me up. I'm ready for that.
Yeah.
And I've had people reflect back to me to say, well, I can see where some of that's true. And the best I've been able to discern is that to say some of that is true is not enough. You need to embrace the entirety of that statement. The second truth in that is called the Tanna, and that means that the suffering and the misery that's referred to in the dukkha are caused by cravings, by desires. Okay? Whether it's a good desire or a bad desire, all desires lead ultimately to this suffering, this pain, this misery. Because there's probably some truth that pleasure doesn't last. And when it's gone, that what you have left over is the pain. And I think that's part of how they would approach that. I'm not a Buddhist. I haven't studied under a Buddhist monk or guru. I've just read a lot of the writings that they put forward. The third truth is that the only way to get rid of the misery is to get rid of the craving. So to not want, to not desire, to not crave. And I think this is a piece that does appeal to those of us in Western culture. You know, how many times would you like to have the refrigerator not call your name, or you know, whatever your deal is, you know, whatever your stumbling block is? It would be nice if that didn't ding us all the time. So there's a piece of that I think we also understand. But the bottom line is you have to get rid of all the cravings, all the desires, to not be attached to anything, so that we abolish the Tanna by following this eightfold noble path, or the other translation is the middle way. How do you get to where it's not pain and suffering? How do you abolish the craving? How do you get rid of the desires? Well, you do it by following this path. One is to get to the right understanding, which is you're getting just kind of a very thin layer version of this from me at night. That's part of where you would start, is to get an understanding of what the whole picture looks like. And then you would move into right-mindedness. How do you get your head in the right place? Which would affect how you speak and affect how you act. And then you would begin to move into living your life, how you earn a living, how you live day to day in this life and interact with people in the right way. That moves into the right kinds of efforts, the right kind of meditation, and eventually the right emancipation. Those 8 things can be categorized like this. The first 2 really talk about a higher wisdom that's beyond the run-of-the-mill day-to-day stuff. The next 3 are really about ethical principles, behavior, treatment of yourself and other people around you. And then the last ones are more internal, meditative ways of thinking and approaching and worldview kinds of things. For the Buddhist, the way they look at humans is that, again, like the Hindu religion, people have no souls. Right? That's the name for souls. And again, like Hinduism, one must live with the results of the cravings of the past, the karma. However, as we talked about last week, the choices you make now can change the future. And there does seem to be a little bit of a divide in Buddhism about whether that future is future like next week or future next life, because they also do believe in reincarnation. So the problem for humans, again, another way to say this is suffering and ignorance. All of life is suffering and caused by the ignorance of our cravings. To stop suffering, therefore, one must stop ignorance of where the suffering comes from and stop the cravings. I'm sure you can all look at that and go, well, there's some truth to that. And I would not deny that. But for a Buddhist, those two things can't be separated. You can't say, I'm just going to stop the suffering by stopping the cravings. You have to first understand that all of life is suffering. Otherwise, you have no reason to stop the cravings, because then you'll start trying to pick and choose your cravings or your desires. So the solution is knowledge. The knowledge comes through teaching, but also through meditation. And the Theravedists believe that every person has to find their own way to salvation, no help. You can get some coaching, as you might call it, some mentoring, but it's all on you. Whereas the Mahayana Buddhists say there are savior-like beings who can hold on for help, that can be seen as ones who intervene. And so the solution to all of this for a Buddhist is Nirvana. I'm sure if you're have any recollection of the 60s and the 70s, you know that Nirvana is a big deal. There was a group called Nirvana, the rock group. People were looking for Nirvana. This is exactly where that comes from, is the Buddhist teaching, Eastern Buddhist teachings. It's the spiritual path, the end of the spiritual path that all true Buddhists seek. And it's the burning out of cravings that come lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. You finally get through those, you have none. And the enlightenment that brings compassion and harmony with the whole universe. So it's the burning out of the desires, the cravings, and the enlightenment that brings some compassion and harmony with the universe. We think of compassion and harmony with people. People are only a part of the universe, but not even the biggest part of the universe. And when I name this way, this is how a lot of Buddhist teachers and westernized teachings name this. It's a little bit more nuanced and a little bit harder for us to get a handle on if you're looking at the purely Eastern people who live and have always lived in Asia. It's important for us to understand that the goal for Buddhists in Nirvana is perfection, pure awareness, not the abyss of annihilation which Hinduism seeks. They really want that the fires of desire burn out for want of fuel, and that one experiences absorption into the transcendent. Remember, we talked about the idea of God for Hinduism, Buddhism, the Eastern religions, is that it's a force, a power, not a being, knowable personality, entity, essence in the universe. However, it's important to also remember that for Buddhists, your individuality, what makes you, you, and me, as we understand that here in America, at least, or Western culture, our individuality goes away. It becomes extinct. You become aware, but you're not aware that you yourself are aware. You're just a part of the ultimate awareness in the universe. I know that's hard to get your head around, because I have a hard time getting my head around that, but that's in English language, a cursory way of describing that. Questions so far? I've been rattling on here for 25 minutes. Comments?
I have a question.
Sure.
Did they have a text or a Bible or something, that they could refer to?
Yes. There are, they're gathered in several different ways. Usually it's called the teachings of the Buddha. If you were to go to like Barnes and Nobles, that's kind of what you would look for. And they're just a number of, we would call them paradoxical statements. I should have brought one with me, but I didn't think to do that, sorry. Where they're almost opposites. And once you meditate on those opposites and understand the tension and accept the tension, it becomes a piece of that place where you begin to release the desires of attachment to the world. That's what they all head towards. I can't quote any of them from memory.
I know one.
Okay, please, Patrick.
It's, what is the sound of one hand clapping?
There you go. Yeah.
That's a Zen koan.
Yeah.
And that's part of what I said, that as Buddhism moved into China, Tibet, Japan, the Zen piece of that got folded into that. That's a good explanation, a good example of something that came out of Buddhism and got morphed with that piece of Zen piece. And that's why they call it Zen Buddhism, which is that kind of both and, but not either or place that most of us like it one way or the other. The tension between two opposites is a weird place for us. Another one, and I can't quote this directly, but it's something like the path of least resistance is the hardest path.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that almost doesn't make sense to say it like that. So
Right.
you, as a Buddhist, you would be, your teacher would give you what that person thought you needed to meditate on it. So that would become your verse of the year, or whatever you want to call it, to think about, to try to understand, figure out how it applies to your life, so that you could start to unravel this attachment to living and life in the physical world and ideas and all the things that go with that.
Thank you.
Please.
My Buddhist friend talks about her chanting,
Yes.
and she has what looks to me like a shrine
Mhm.
in a corner where she does that. And she's a very sweet friend, and she also interchanges. She'll say, I'm praying for you. It's not prayer like we would think of prayer, but
Right.
so as we're studying this, I'm trying to think of, how best to reach someone who she grew up in Japan, and she's very old world Japanese, and has, her family has been Buddhist probably for generations.
Sure. Yeah. Let's come back to that piece at the end. So
Okay.
we can maybe brainstorm some ways, because I think your friend has a different kind of experience of Buddhism than somebody who's kind of dabbling in it or thinks they want to be, and are fully westernized in their grew up in America kind of thing and have all that worldview. So there's
What we might call a convert.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Mhm. Okay.
Good. That's a good question, though, and I want to make sure to allow some time for that. Yeah. Anybody else?
Patty, going back to one of the first slides, you said that he was from the high caste,
Yes.
and, so he had all the privileges growing up,
Mhm.
kind of like Johnny Manziel, and then he became unhappy. Do you know why he became unhappy?
Because the life he'd been born into, this is the way it's comes across in the literature. The life that he was born into didn't satisfy him. And
What I had always heard was because he was a very sheltered kid. He lived behind this wall,
Right.
and then one day he was taken outside the wall or by his servants, and he saw a dead person, and he saw beggars in the street,
Right.
and that was what he came back and then stewed about that, and then that was what. So is that what you had heard?
Yes,
Is
that's
that-
exactly right.
I didn't know if that was a.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
That, the answers that he'd been given about what life was and what his role was, what it fit with what he saw, he could make those two things go together. His experiences with the people in the streets, as it were, kind of thing, it really bothered him, and it was part of what led him to on this quest. And all the people around him couldn't give him any satisfactory answers about why was this? Why was he this way? And there were these other people who weren't, and the whole karma stuff wasn't quite enough of an explanation for him.
Yeah, because a lot of the things that he came up with later on about the suffering and misery, unhappiness would have probably been implanted by what he'd witnessed there.
Right. Good.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I have two screens here. I'm looking at you on the camera, but I'm checking the screen over here where I can see you to see if you're waving your hand or something. So.
And we're able to hear you very well now, Patty.
Okay. All right. That's good.
You fixed it.
Figure out what the deal is on my computer when I plug in the speaker so I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
One observation on Buddhism and Hinduism
Right.
is it's not necessarily a tenet, but it's an observation, is they kind of taught their followers that, particularly with JC's comments about Buddha, things aren't necessarily what they seem to be. In other words, when you see it with your own eyes, it's not necessarily what you've been told or taught.
Right.
And I think a lot of the philosophy behind what we're studying right now sort of explains that.
Yeah, and you can understand better why that statement's made, and that's important.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, I have a few more here slides I want to talk about. Just very quickly, the Buddha didn't really want people to speculate about what Nirvana was like. That led the people astray, but he did teach that it was the end of this cycle of rebirth and suffering. The whole idea is to get out of the suffering, and rebirth is part of that suffering cycle. And the end of the ignorant cravings which produce that misery, that's, Nirvana ends that. And the other part that he taught very clearly is that Nirvana is not nothingness, the kind of annihilation thing, but awareness without separation and without desire. And again, that's a concept that, he said that's what it is. When it happens, you'll know it, but you'll not be in the cycle of rebirth to tell anybody. It'll just happen for you and you'll know it, but you won't be attached to it. You won't desire it. It will just be what it is. And to experience something without any emotion, without any desire, without any like celebration is probably something good. Like that is supposed to be good. And then to have it without celebration seems a little odd to our Western mindset, I think.
Yeah.
For Buddhists, I picked this out of one of the writings. They said that the whole point of what you're doing is to become an island to yourself by contemplating the body as body, earnestly, clearly aware, mindful, and having put away all hankering and fretting for the world, and likewise with regard to feelings, mind, and mind objects, so that you're aloof, detached, not sucked into stuff, if you will.
Oh my goodness, what happened?
And that's primary for them. And so Buddhism is a solitary work toward their understanding of salvation. You do it for yourself. You mess up, and you'll be reborn to do it again. If you progress, you progress. But there's really not help. There may be guidance, but not help in the sense of grace or mercy or community, although there are communities of monks, yes, and female monks, male monks. There are those people that are together and have that sort of community, but they're not responsible necessarily to help each other, except to pass on whatever wisdom they have. You still have to do everything on your own. And that's an important concept in Buddhism. It's entirely on you. It's entirely on you. Very quickly, they have a moral code for everyone. Doesn't matter who you are. Do not kill, do not steal, refrain from wrong sexual behavior, don't lie, don't use intoxicants. So a true Buddhist doesn't drink to drunkenness or any of that kind of stuff. They don't use drugs, they don't do any of that. So when the Beatles got into Eastern religions and they were smoking pot and doing all that kind of stuff, they weren't really following Buddhist teachings. I just want to be clear about that. They do believe that meditation is super important, and I wanted to get to this for to help you understand what's going on there for your friend Marie.
Yeah.
The altar shrine kind of thing in the home. And the point of that is that they have a 1-point concentration to start their meditation, and that altar shrine, whatever they call it, each person has a little different word for it, is to help with that 1-point concentration so that they can gain insight into the true nature of reality. The 1 point of focus helps them push away all the then it helps them make that connection into the reality of daily living. So they take that understandings, those insights into living every day. If you're someone who's further down the road and you're a monk in one of these groups, there's further things you must do in order to follow the moral code. One is to eat moderately and not afternoon. If you eat stuff afternoon, then
Like a 14-hour fast.
yeah, we're in trouble. You're to avoid spectacles. So drama queens and drama kings are out of line.
Wow.
Conflict, you need to avoid that. They don't use flowers or perfumes or jewelry. They have very simple beds, and they don't accept money from anyone personally. They get contributions to their group, but it's not a personal thing. They can't have their own kinds of pockets of money, if you will. So, just a summary statement. Okay, well, did somebody want to say something? Okay, we'll come back to things that you want to talk about, but I just want to make this summary statement that the end of suffering in the Buddhist mindset is letting go of the need for and the notion of a permanent self. That you yourself, as you understand you right now, goes into eternity in some shape or form is not in Buddhist thinking, not in Buddhist understanding. The process of living, the processes of living do not cause suffering. So, what you have to do to live is not causing the suffering. It's the cause of suffering is unwanted, unwarranted attachment to the processes. The way that has been explained to me is if you're really into skiing and that you enjoy that, that's okay. But if you get attached to that in a way that your whole day just down the tubes, because you can't go skiing on a day you planned, that's a signal that something is out of line for you. You can go ski, you can enjoy that, but you can't be attached to the enjoyment. You note the enjoyment and let it pass. If you get attached to the enjoyment, then you will continue the suffering cycle that they're trying to get out of. So those are kind of the, in a nutshell, summaries of basic Buddhist understanding of life and what they believe and aim for. Okay, I think that's the end of my slides. Nope, it's not. I had one more. This was something I did really quick at the end. This will lead us into the questions and that sort of thing. Why are people often drawn to Buddhism? Well, I believe that people are often seeking inner peace and harmony, and there's an aspect of it that appeals to that. They'd like to be part of something bigger, and Buddhism appeals to that. And a lot of people are looking for some order in their daily lives, and Buddhism has some definite teachings about how one should order life and thinking and behaving, and they're pretty clear about that, and that can be very appealing as well. And this personal effort and personal responsibility are also very appealing to people who are looking for some stability in their life, and they don't want to have to depend on something outside of themselves. Okay, that's my last slide. So I'm gonna stop the share so we can see each other a little better. Comments, questions, statements? Go back to Marie's question about, so how do you engage somebody who's either thinking about Buddhism or is a Buddhist? How do you get them to consider something beyond the circle of that? Carol, I can see you talking, but I think you're muted.
How's that?
That's better.
Yeah.
To start the conversation, I have a dear friend that was in the same business that I was. I managed stadiums and arenas and convention centers. And Jonna, 30 years ago, was a very outgoing, vibrant, expressive person. And I did a lot of mentoring with her because there weren't a lot of women in my business at the time. And over the years, I've gotten to know her pretty well. And she's a Buddhist. And excuse me, she invited me to go on a meditation weekend. And it was kind of a rough period in my life at the time. And she thought that would be helpful. And to start with, excuse me, there was absolutely, and I mean absolutely no talking. Now, Rick and Marie, you know that was a hard one.
Yeah. Why would you do that, Carol?
I can't believe you went to that thing.
Weekend. But because I was the new one there, I had a spiritual guider that worked with me over the weekend. But I mean, it makes sense to me now, a lot of things that were going on. The food was very limited. And you're right, nothing after noon, which put me in perplexity right there.
Mhm.
And it was so different. But now the Jana that I know, Jana Boxley, she's the manager of our convention center here in Spokane. She's a very different person. To be in our business, you had to be, I think, a certain amount of excitement and enjoyment, and you see her now, and she's always very into herself, very limited on what she does.
Subdued.
Yeah, very subdued, a completely different person over the last 30 years that she's grown into. And now it makes sense to me, after listening to you, Patty, why that progression has happened. And she's very committed to Buddhism, Her boss one time told me that 50% of her salary goes to Buddhism.
Wow.
That it doesn't even come to her, it goes to Buddhism. So it's
She is committed.
Yeah, she lives very modestly. She went from a beautiful, big home that they had to a very sparse, very limited home. Now, Marie, she has a meditation room that she spends a great deal of time in. Many of us over the years as professionals in that business, you work long hours. Everybody else's fun is, our work. So we worked holidays, weekends, because that's when everybody else in sports and entertainment were having fun. But John was very disciplined in that she had a schedule, she stuck to it. She didn't approach the job like the rest of us did. But this has helped Patty a lot for me to understand her progression over the last 30 years.
Yeah, good. I'm glad that's given you some insight.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy for us to kind of shake our head and go, oh, wow, that's really sad. But I would hope that some of the things we've talked about not only have given insight, but a little more sympathy, so that when the doors are open, we can say, oh, so not in a snarky way, but tell me, how is that helping you?
Right.
What are you getting out of that? So we get more toward the genuinely curious, interested side, because it's not necessarily going to change what we believe, but sometimes a caring friend can say, wow, I just noticed such a change in you, and I'm not sure what to make of that. That conversation may be very helpful in opening the door, because I, as you were talking, Carol, I kind of wondered if part of what happens to a Buddhist, a Western convert of a Buddhist, is that they get kind of into self, and it's all about me and how I feel. And boy, that can be pretty limiting, Is there joy in that? Is there fulfillment in that? Might be a question I would be curious to know. I don't know your friend, obviously, so I don't know if you could ask that without offense. But it would
that's something that would be an interesting question. Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to follow up on that with her.
Yeah, sounds like you have a good relationship with her, so she might be willing to share her perspective and experience, and asking those questions could certainly open a door to something helpful to her that might release her from that kind of. This is my sense. I'm not sure I'm right, but this is my sense that folks who really get into Buddhism become very burdened by the fact that they're not where they want to be. They know where they're supposed to be. The harder they try, the further away it gets. It's like the goalpost keeps moving. And
Yeah.
that's a real heavy
Mhm.
burden. Because you don't want to be reincarnated. You don't want to go through the suffering. And so you try harder and yet you don't attain it. Feels like kind of a gerbil cage, you know?
And you better not have a good time or be happy during
Yeah.
that process
Yeah, and to
or crave anything.
yeah, and so to engage in that conversation about, so how do you deal with that? Do you give yourself grace? Okay, I blew it. Can you do that? Is that possible, or do you have to? What do you have to do in the face of that? Might also be an open door to the conversation, and that I'm wondering if that wouldn't help you with your friend Marie, that is the Buddhist by tradition. I wonder how much of what she does is that's what you do to be a good member of this family.
Right. The only thing that I feel like I'm making some inroads frequently when she will admire my givingness or my doing things for her and specifically and things. And she'll say, "You're such a good Christian." And I always say, it's Jesus inside of me. Because I think that's a foreign concept to her.
Yeah, it is.
And it's an oversimplification, but I think it's, it's a truth.
Yeah, because remember, for them, God is not personable, is not a person, not personal. There's no relation to God possible, because that doesn't even make sense in their thinking. And so that there's somebody out there who cares, whether it's a good day or a bad day, whether you've got troubles or not, I think is an open door to the reality of God caring and loving us.
What do they think about the afterlife?
So the afterlife is rebirth into another life until you get it right. And then when you get it right, it's just pure awareness. You become part of the force of the universe, and you become a part of the awareness of the universe. So there's no relational piece to it. There's no reuniting with other people who love God. And recognizing them, like Scripture seems to teach. There is this isness awareness without individuality. Every time I say this stuff, I feel like I'm talking gibberish. It doesn't connect with me, so I have a hard time expressing.
It's hard.
And Patty, I think one of the biggest values of this session of classes is one of the things I think that we tend to forget is that we were given freedom of choice, right? He gave us freedoms that we didn't deserve, that we never earned. We just have them. And so all of these other organizations that were developed by choice by somebody. And as Christians, to gain an understanding of where they're coming from, I think it's really pretty helpful, like for Carol and Marie, to talk to their friends. I think this is really a valuable class.
Mhm.
It is. Yeah, I agree.
And
I had a student one time tell me he was a convert, and he said, there's birth, life, and death. That's it.
exactly. And to say, to hear that and then to be able to have enough of an understanding of that to say, and does that satisfy you? Is that okay with you?
That's a
What if
great
there's
point.
something else
Yeah.
that's more joyful, more abundant? Would you be interested in that?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
better than because my response was, oh no, there is so much more.
Yeah.
But the question would have been a better response.
And I don't know about you, but for me, it's hard to ask the question if I don't have enough understanding of what's going on for them to ask the question. And I think it's important. Buddhism especially is taken a real significant toehold in the US and here in the Northwest especially, because historically a lot of immigrants into the Northwest came from Asia, and they were Buddhists, like your friend Marie. Her family's Buddhist, her family's family was Buddhist, her family's families was Buddhist way back. And to question that is dangerous for them because they are betraying their family.
And in
Their heritage.
and in their heritage, honor is like got to be in the top 3 at least.
Right, exactly. So if we don't understand that, then we can't develop a careful relationship, a caring relationship, so that we're with them, even though they go, I can't do that, I'm not there yet. Okay, we can keep talking. That kind of sense of that, because you now understand what they're struggling with. It's not I'm right and you're wrong. It's what they really are struggling with. And a lot of folks I've talked to who've gotten into Buddhism or think they're into Buddhism have really been burned by life. And so they're looking for something that's going to fix that. And to hear what appeals to them about Buddhism is really helpful.
There's a
Hey,
lot
so
of
I have a
esoteric
question.
platitudes, aren't there?
Yes. Leslie.
Okay, so I have a friend whose son married a Buddhist. That was the strangest wedding I've ever been to.
I bet.
I had to stand up the whole time, and it was like 96 degrees outside. The whole thing took place outside. But anyway, so she's American, but she was converted. She converted to Buddhism. So should she have married somebody that didn't convert? I mean, do they allow that?
I think that becomes a family thing. Depends on how strong the family is. Maybe the son was under a lot of pressure from family to do the right thing and honor the heritage, and we're not going to accept your wife unless she converts. And to not have family members accepted is really, really hard in that culture. Really, really difficult.
Well, she's the only one in the family that converted to Buddhism.
That's what I mean.
And then my friend's son married her, but there's no way he's converting. I mean, I can tell you that.
Oh, I see. Okay, I got your story mixed up. Sorry, I misunderstood.
Oh, that's okay. I probably didn't say it right. So I was just wondering, if she's a true Buddhist, could she have actually married him?
Yeah.
Knowing that he would never convert?
Yeah. If it's not a cultural thing, it's her personal preference, then it becomes her personal choice. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. It's not like the old school Catholic or Jewish family or whatever, where it's like, ooh, if you marry outside our deal, then we're going to disown you. It's right. If
Wonder-
it's a personal choice, then it's not a big deal. But if she had been like Marie's friend, where it's multi-generations of Buddhists back to who knows how long, that could have been the case.
That would have been an issue. Okay.
Just wondered if she
Actually, to
she fed her
Leslie's
husband
point.
afternoon.
Oh, sorry.
I
To
was just saying-
Leslie's,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I'm just
So
making
let-
a snarky. I'm making a snarky remark. I was just wondering if
That's
she
okay.
fed her husband afternoon.
Oh,
Oh, that's good. But Leslie has a great point. And ironically enough, if you looked at what we studied tonight about their faith, it would probably be easier for a Buddhist to have a cross-sectional marriage than it would be many denominations of Christians. You know,
Right.
just based on their philosophy.
mhm.
I find that kind of ironic.
It is ironic, isn't it? Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is.
I agree with Rick on that about the ease of that, because comparing Buddhism and Hinduism, I see Buddhism as a way of life rather than a religion. And I think
Gotcha.
that's what they do. I was in the Peace Corps in Thailand, and every morning I'd see the monks out there with their bowls, and you would give them food, and they wouldn't eat until afterwards. They'd ride the bus for free. They were very revered, and every male became a Buddhist monk for a period of time. And so, to me, it doesn't seem like Buddhism is really a true religion, as much as it is a way of life. And I think about some of these people who convert, these Western people, I think maybe they got burned out on religion. They don't like all the trappings that go with religion, but they're looking for a way of life they can embrace that doesn't have a holy person. So when I think of Buddhism, I think of it as a way of life, and maybe that's because of the time I spent in Thailand. But
That's a great point, Jay.
it seems to affect their life more than Hinduism does, and it seems to affect their life a lot more than Christianity does to a lot of people in the United States.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you know what? It's easier for me to accept it thinking that way too, thinking of it as a way of life rather than a religion. It's more accepting to me. If
And
that makes sense.
I want you to understand that the reason it's considered a religion twofold. One is because it does have a concept of God in quote marks, and they are seeking salvation, and they do have some worldviews about that. And this, because the Mahayana Buddhist thing where they revere the Buddha as God or a God-like person, and the majority of Buddhists are like that. That pushes it more into the realm of religion. But I do agree totally, JC, that for them to embrace Buddhism, it is a way of life, and they just wouldn't think of not doing that stuff. Whereas we have to talk ourselves into it sometimes, you know.
And so that in that part of the world, their religion or their faith or their practice really is more caught than taught, perhaps, as you started off with last week.
Are the family ties as strong in Buddhism as it is in some of the other religions? The reason I ask that is that my friend, one of the things that she's done is she's given up her husband. They're not divorced. She still loves him. But because of the sexual relationship, she's given up that and all of that. They live separately now, and it's so different. Yeah. Are those family ties as strong? Because it seems to me that it's more individualism and more self than it is family and you know,
Community.
So the shorter answer to that would be, it sounds to me like she's adopted a lot of the monk side of the Buddhist teachings without belonging to the monk community. And that's a Western bent on things. I don't know if she's getting teaching from some Buddhist person in the States, like you were talking about this group that you went to be a part of for a weekend. She's got somebody like that that's helping her. But in Asian countries, the family ties are very strong. So I don't understand where that disconnect would be, except to say the Western adoption of some things and not other things.
Mhm.
I'm troubled because a lot of people in like America or Western culture take pieces of Buddhism, but they don't take all of it. Richard Gere, the actor's a Buddhist.
Right.
He doesn't live modestly. He
Right.
eats after lunch. I mean, come on. So what is it? It's what in Christianity we might call a nominal Buddhist, but they
Yeah,
still
well, don't a lot of us or a lot of Christians
nominal, right?
pick and choose parts too?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just as there are sects, sects, in the Christian religion, it
Yep.
sounds like her friend may have gotten into one of those far off Buddhist sects who are taking it further than what would be prescribed if you were doing it. I have a sister-in-law who is from Japan, who is Buddhist, and she grew up on the family farm, which has been in the family for centuries, and all of the ancestors are buried in caves on the property. And when she goes home, she goes
Right.
and visits them. So I think it's kind of like apples and oranges when you get a Westerner trying to.
And when we do the next session, you'll see where some of the traditional religion pieces of Japan and China have impacted Buddhism, and that ancestor worship and all that kind of stuff folds into that, and so it becomes partly culture, not just religion, but culture. And I think that's part of what you're referring to also, JC, where it's a way of life. Well, culture is a way of life.
Exactly.
And so that aspect of Buddhism jumps out at us strongly when we look at it from the outside. And they look at us and go, what? That's just what we do,
Yeah. I think too, one of the ironies is particularly if we go back to India, where we studied Hinduism and then the offshoot of Buddhism coming from that, is we look at the various denominations of even Protestant Christianity. There's a bunch of them out there. There's probably a multitude of other spin-offs of Buddhism, not to mention Hinduism, which has got a ton of them. There has to be, and ironically, we don't read about it much. It's like all Buddhists are Buddhists. Do they look at all Christians as Christians? The irony is, I think and JC alluded to it, there's got to be a ton of spin-offs to reconcile philosophical differences that are contrived by man versus, well, in fact, Buddha was a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, there might be a scholar that followed his teachings but said, I like everything about it except for this and this and this, so we're going to do it this way.
Yeah. And if we did a whole, several weeks on Buddhism, I would describe some of those major, they call them schools, philosophical schools.
Schools, okay.
Yeah. And so this one group does this and this one group does that. And those are some of the things that have come across the Pacific to us.
Gotcha.
There's one, I was going to look up his name so I could say it right, but if you Google this guy, he's a Vietnamese monk, Buddhist monk, and his last name is, I think it's T-H-A.
He's not on.
Pardon?
is that Teach Not Han?
Yeah, that's him. Yeah. And really followed. I mean, if you Google his name, you'll see, you can go to Barnes and Nobles and get a bunch of his books, and he's just really out there, and he's the 21st century version of Alan Watts, who was really popular in the 70s, who made Buddhism palatable for the Western mind. And so they've taken the thoughts and kind of morphed them into stuff that we can accept. And that's the Buddhism we often run into, like your friend Carol has probably gotten involved in that aspect of it.
I've heard her speak about Alan Watts.
Yeah.
What is the rule? What is the rule? Women can't become monks, right?
Correct.
So
Well,
what is the role? What
pretty
is
much.
the role of women then?
My understanding is you can't get to Nirvana in Buddhism, or you can't get to moksha in Hinduism as a woman. You have to come back as a man first.
Oh my God.
Ooh.
That's unfair.
I find
Un-American.
Yeah, that's not fair.
Yeah. So all of us who are women definitely have some nasty karma in our background. Because we're not men. That's how they look at it. The whole concept of where we heard in China that they were getting rid of all the baby girls.
Uh-huh.
Part of that comes out of that understanding of going to the next level. You need to be a guy. So,
The biggest version of white supremacy.
yeah. So we are way past our 8 o'clock moment. So
Great class.
Yeah, this is a
Yeah,
good.
it is.
to go, we can dismiss you with grace and understanding. I'm willing to stay around for a few more minutes if you have something else you want to talk about, but I don't.
What's our subject for next week, Patty?
We're going to move to China, and we're going to talk about Taoism.
Okay.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
I'll be back.
Oh, good. Yay. All right.
Good, Carol.
Good for you, Carol.
Yeah. All are welcome. Yeah, for sure. Anything else? I'd like to, since we're a little bit past our time, I'm going to ask Pastor Devin to close this part with prayer, and then if anybody has a question, I'll stay, but otherwise we'll be done. And
Thanks, Patty.
I really like the note, Patty.
If anybody has a question that they think of tomorrow or the next day, certainly pass it on to me. I can pass it on to Patty. Here's the hint. Her email is on the website for Mission Northwest, so you can actually track her down quite easily. And we're also going to have the notes and recordings hopefully soon onto our website. Our AV webmaster, wonderful guy, but he's working 2 or 3 jobs. So we're not pressuring him too much. If there's a recording that you want from a previous session, let me know, and I can email that to you directly. So with that, let us